Hey guys, welcome back to Vertical Momentum. I'm your host, Richard Kaufman, also known as the Comeback Coach. Guys, if you're like me and you love true crime books and novels, this episode is for you. This young lady, I've had her on the show before talking about this amazing book. I just got back from vacation and it was the only book that I actually took on vacation. I loved it so much. We're going to be talking about it. Now, some of the stuff we talk about, it might hit a little bit hard to some people. So just be careful when you're listening to this because we might get into some deep stuff. So, Cynthia, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for having me. And you're looking younger every time I see you.
I try to be. And guys, like I said, here is the book. You might not be able to see it that great. I have it right here with me. So we're going to be talking about it. It's called He First Killed the Minuteman, and this is going to be amazing conversation. But first question, like I ask every guest, is what is your definition of resiliency?
Well, resiliency is accepting life's blows and finding a way to come back, to hang on, to never give up, to keep on trying.
I love that. And it's so true. Like I say, you get knocked down 7 times, you get back up 8, right?
Absolutely.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, where'd you grow up, and then how did you get into this world of true crime?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm worldly in true crime. This was my first true crime book, but I have written other books. I grew up in New Hampshire, which if you listen to me very long, you'll pick up, even though I've lived in Connecticut for a lot of years since I grew up, and don't quite have the New York twang of most of my Connecticut friends. But I was a professor at the University of Connecticut for 31 years, and I wrote very sedate stuff, very, books that are for academic reasons, not for fun. And then after I retired, I still wanted to write, but I didn't want to write as seriously as I had been. Not that this isn't serious writing, but I didn't want to write about serious topics, although I ended up writing about World War II in one book. And in this book, of course, it's as serious as death. And that's what it is about: murder, death, mental health. Big mental health influence on all of the things that happen in this book.
So how did this book come about?
I was in between books, and my husband and I were taking a walk on a deserted road in the town of Willington, Connecticut, where we had found a road that wasn't paved. We'd been walking a lot because it was COVID times, and we didn't want to hurt our knees any more than we had to. So we'd found this deserted road, and we started out with a dog along this lane. Just as we're getting out of his truck, there's a bulletin on the news that there was a terrible murder in the town of Willington about an hour before, maybe less. The killer took off and on foot, and they don't know where he is. So here we are in the woods of Willington, with a dog who would probably lick him rather than attack anyone new. And after a few minutes of walking, we jumped back in the truck and headed out of there, not wanting to be exposed. But after that, I was so fascinated by the topic. And what the reporter had said was that he had committed a murder on an innocent bystander who had stopped to help him and had used an axe to do it. That was the first part of the reporting, was an axe. Later on, we found out that it was a samurai sword he had actually used, and that he had trained himself to do some kind of ritualistic murders or suicides as what had driven him to be there that day. But he committed murder by samurai, and he did it to, almost did it to another man who came to the rescue of the first man, or attempted to come out and see if he could help. So it was pretty unusual, very gory, and a hideous scene for everyone around it.
So what was the backstory? Because I think from the last time I remember, there was some connections to other stuff that happened in the past that you found out. But what was the backstory of this young gentleman?
Um, he had grown up in a town of Newtown, Connecticut, which is the community that Sandy Hook Elementary School was in. And his sisters had been in that school, although not the murdered class, thank God for them. But he had been exposed to that whole Sandy Hook phenomenon. Everyone in that town was tainted by that slaughter, 26 students and teachers combined. And he had known Adam Lanza, who was the young man who had been the perpetrator in a very serious mental health meltdown where he'd used, military weapons. And he had known the boy, he had known the boy's mother, and he was shocked and consumed by it for a while and wanted to do good to kind of try and make it right from his perspective. So he had become fixated on it, wanted to do things like raise money for them, get involved with the parents who had lost children. He looked from the outside looking in like he was doing heroic things. And in his kid's mind, he was doing what he could to control whatever else this brought out in him. I think he himself had some mental instability. His parents were getting divorced right around the time of this attack in his community. And he didn't know which way to go in some ways. He was a big, strapping, handsome kid and brainy. So he tried to put his energy into sports, which he'd always enjoyed. He played football. He was a little rough, I guess, in the games, but that's football. And he was a brilliant student. So with the brains and the good looks and the star athleticism, he got pretty far away from people because there was a mystique around him that he was doing so well. Nobody knew that he wasn't doing well. He went away to college and was doing well and making friends, but then things started to go wrong in his relationships. And when the University of Connecticut closed down because of COVID, he lost his footing. He no longer had the friends, he no longer had the contacts, and his relationship was a mess, partly his fault, partly hers, as I understand it, but we won't go into her. He and I have become pen pals while he's in prison. It's not that I wish him to get out because I think he's in the right place, but I do wish him to survive as best he can and to get something out of this existence and to put something perhaps back into society because he's got a life sentence.
Now, what was the relationship between him and this man that he killed? Was there a relationship?
I never met him before in his life. He had gone to the neighborhood in Willington where his now ex-girlfriend lived. He brought the sword. He says he was going to commit ritualistic suicide in front of the family just to show them how wrong they had been about him not being okay for their daughter. I'm not sure of that logic. Others have believed, and the district attorney believed, that he was probably going to kill her or frighten the family very badly. He never went through with it, though. He arrived there on this small road in backwoods Willington, and he chickened out before he could reach the house. He was going up through the woods to reach the house without coming straight up a driveway. And instead, he ran into some neighbors who were pretty curious about him. He walked through the yard of Ted Demers, and Ted was alerted by a neighbor that there was a kid hanging around his barn. And he asked the kid, who turned out to be this young man, what was going on. And he said he'd lost his bike down at the foot of the hill, and he thought it was broken down. That was his excuse for being wandering in the woods. And so Ted Demers said, well, hop on the back of my little tractor thing and we'll go down there, and I'll take you to your bike and let's see what we can do, because Ted was very clever with his hands. And he hopped on the bike behind Mr. Demers, and they went down the hill, and by the time they got to the bottom, Ted had asked enough questions, I guess, to get the kid to know he was going to have to own up to something. And instead he decided that Mr. Demers was the enemy, and he snapped and he let loose, and he started literally hacking away at this man who was giving him a ride, and killed him.
And now this gentleman was a veteran, correct?
Yeah, well, yes, he'd been in the Marines briefly. He had health complications that got him out, but he was the kind of image of a soldier too. And the man who came out of his house when the racket started happening, when Mr. Demers was getting murdered, had been in the Navy, and he was 80 years old, and he was then attacked by this same kid with a samurai sword, and he barely escaped with his life. He was lucky that he fell behind some trees that were gnarly and slowed the kid down. And when a neighbor above this part of the street came out on her porch and looked out and saw what was happening, she gave a blood-curdling scream, and that's when the kid apparently woke up from his fugue state, from his bewilderment, and realized what he was doing, or realized that he was going to be found out, because he was now surrounded by people knowing he was there. And he took off on the bike and got a little ways before he ditched the bike and then was on foot.
How long did it take for the authorities to catch him?
Well, sadly, quite a few days, 6 days. He was in the woods. He was, as I said, a smart kid, young man, and he stayed in the swamp overnight practically, trying to avoid the dogs and the hunting pursuit of him. And then he walked through the water till he found what looked like an empty house, or a house where he didn't see much going on. And he went in through the back of the house, slithered up through things that I describe well in the book, broke glass quietly, got in and unlocked the door and walked himself in, and found his next victim. We call him Mr. H because he didn't want his name in the book. He was asleep on a daybed watching TV, had just finished his supper, had laid his gun out near him that evening. And when the kid showed up at 5 a.m, smelling of a swamp because he'd been standing in it all night, he woke the man up with a gun pointed in his face. And he said, "Don't turn your head to look at me or I'll blow your bleeping head off." And of course, the man did look. It's in his own home. No one is going to tell him what to do. And he looked at the kid, and then he turned his head back, and they went on to have a relationship as such for 24 hours while the kid held him hostage. He needed to rest some. He hadn't slept in a couple of days, according to him. He needed to clean. He needed to eat. And he kept this guy tied up and in front of a television for all that time. Stole his money, stole a couple of guns, and in the end, when he did take off, took his vehicle. But during that 24 hours, there were phone calls, people checking on him because he was a widower, so they knew he lived alone. He was in his 70s, and people were concerned because somebody was on the loose out that way. And he had to fake the phone calls that everything was okay. Although he was smart enough to try a few hints that somebody who'd been alert might have picked up and realized he was saying, "Oh no, it's okay. I'm going to go pick up my dog." And he named a dog, and the dog had been dead for years. And he thought his cousin or whoever it was that had called would catch on that that wasn't happening. But it didn't work out. He was left alone with the murderer for 24 hours.
So thankfully he was saved. He didn't get murdered. So now when this kid or man finally left the house with guns, cash, and a vehicle, how did he get? How did the police find him, and how did that arrest go? Was it quiet, or what? Did he put up a fight?
Well, the Peter Manfredonia is the perpetrator, and Peter wanted to get to a friend's house in Derby, Connecticut, because he knew this guy had money, had often had cash in his house. So he, at 5 a.m. the following day, he got in this man's truck and headed for Derby, Connecticut. Early in the morning, there wasn't much traffic. It didn't take him long. And he arrived before anyone was very alert to the fact he might be looking for this friend. Although the night before, the friend's family, when they heard Peter Manfredonia's name on the news, had thought, we better warn our son to, come stay with us or to be on the alert because Peter might come looking for him since they grew up together. And the former girlfriend of Peter had given the police information that had led to them knowing, once they found his motorcycle dumped, that, from his license plate, they had discovered his name and his where he might have been going to his home. So they had set up a trail after him, but the trail was quite a bit after him because they didn't realize that he had spent the night in Willington and was leaving early the next morning. No one had quite caught up to the possibility of where he might be. So he's driving this stolen truck down the highway at 5 a.m. and arrives near his friend's apartment, where he decides he'd better hide the truck because maybe somebody knew what he had for wheels now. And he went into a park and he went to put it into some deep grass and kind of on the edge out of sight. And instead he ran over some rocks and got stuck and ended up fleeing the vehicle, taking his money and guns and walking the block or so to the home of his friend, who had been on alert, but by a certain hour in the morning, he and his girlfriend had gone to bed and they had locked the place up tight, and they had taken their names off of Facebook. They had blocked him from finding him that way, so through social media, and they thought they had done what they could to do right. But Peter was desperate, and he wasn't going to stand on the formality of, oh, by the way, I'm coming over. He just arrived at their place and snuck in a back window that was either unlatched or not secure. And he arrived in their apartment unannounced with a gun in hand and said he was going to take some money. And the man in the apartment, whose name was Michael, decided, no, you're not. And he was then immediately in an argument with him, which ended up getting into fighting. The girlfriend woke up. She said, what's going on? And excuse me, this young man's name was Nicholas. I mixed him up with a family member. And Nicholas said, it's Peter, call the police. So she went to call the police, but when Peter heard that, he dragged Nicholas into the room and they had more of a fight. And then he ended up shooting his friend twice. And that was the end of his friend's life. So he took another life in Derby, kidnapped the young woman and made her drive her car, a Volkswagen Jetta, to launch his escape out of the state of Connecticut, which is what he wanted to do. And they took off.
So now he's got two murders and an attempted murder under his belt, and he's got kidnapping. So pretty much
And a hostage taking.
and a hostage. So it's pretty much wide open at this point. It's desperate measures at this point, right?
Right. He didn't have anything to stop for in his own mind. He had already committed so many transgressions that there was no easy way out for him. And all the time he'd been with the hostage in Wellington overnight, that 24 hours with Mr. H. Mr. H had talked to him to try and make sense, to try and do the right thing. He said, all right, you committed a murder, but you don't want to make it worse. If you compound it, there's no hope for you. But if you stop now and turn yourself in, you have a chance that the courts may see something. He tried and tried to talk to him to do the right thing, but it didn't sink in. And he carried on. And he later says he wished he'd listened to him, because all he did was get himself in deeper, in worse trouble. The first act, when he killed Mr. Demers, could possibly have been seen as a mental breakdown of some kind. But 24 hours later, when you get up and go do it again, it's hard to say temporary insanity, So he was really in deep. He kidnapped this beautiful young woman and forced her at gunpoint to drive him. And this went on for about a day. He finally released her, but not after using her phone to call an Uber, using her to help him get somebody else who might drive him places. And he skipped along his merry way, getting into New York and Maryland, but without a real plan. He didn't know what to do. He did have plenty of money by then, but he didn't know what to do with it to get out of the trouble he was in, because there was no way out. His picture was everywhere. Certainly, every time he went through highway lights, and the check where they want to check on your license plate and get you, well, they immediately knew where he was, because by then they had found his friend dead in Derby, and they knew what car his girlfriend had been driving, and they were able to track him that way. So he was needing the Uber to get rid of the evidence of what vehicle he was in. And while she was driving him, she was desperate. She hated him. I mean, he had just murdered the man she loved. They had planned a life together. She was incredibly upset. I can't even imagine it. She thought for sure she was going to be dead at any moment herself. She said she kept planning her funeral in her head. She just kept focusing on, I wonder who will come to my funeral, things like that. And then she thought of ways she might attract attention by driving a little erratically, maybe too fast. Every time she sped up, Peter would say, you slow down now. I don't want the police pulling us over. And different things like that. Till finally he realized that just how upset and sickened she was by the whole thing. And he let her loose, and she took a hostage that he had picked up along the way. Not really a hostage, but a guy who didn't know what was going on. They had given a ride to, because they had hoped he would help them get an Uber. And she was left with him, and he helped her get the police. And so she gave more evidence, but he was still wandering around. And it took a couple of days, because he stayed under the radar, for somebody to spot the man who'd been described sitting in the side of a parking lot. It was 5 or 6 days later. He was just sitting there, and the cops showed up, and they asked him if he was Peter Manfredonia, and he said yes. They asked him where his guns and his money were, and he said over there, and he pointed to some bags along the side of the woods, and he was peacefully arrested at that point. But
now, at this time in Connecticut, was there a death sentence? Did they have the death sentence, or was it mostly life?
Connecticut does not have a death sentence. So he was given a maximum sentence, you can imagine, 55 years. He was 23 years old when he was arrested, and serving 55 years is probably close to a death sentence. Um, and that was a compromise that the involved people made together as a team with the prosecutor, so that he could be put away, and put away without a chance of parole, without any hearings, just put away, and they wouldn't have to go through the horrendous ordeal of an actual, you know, sentencing at the court hearings. He was found guilty by the judge, and he pled guilty. That was his part of the deal, to save himself. He had looked at, I'm sure with his attorney, not guilty by reason of insanity, because he had several things in his favor in the insanity area. But what the courts have done often, and in Connecticut for sure, has been, when somebody is not guilty by reason of insanity, they want to know that they're absolutely cured by the time they're let out. And he was not thinking that that would work to his benefit. He had been shown many, many times when they got longer sentences than 55 years even, because they couldn't prove they were well when they wanted to prove that they were well. And so that was not an easy out for him. He just took what was coming to him. And
now, after being on the lam for 6 days, was he kind of relieved to finally be able to go somewhere to get a shower, to get some food, to
yeah, I don't know how to describe it. It was probably a mixture of, this is inevitable anyway, I guess I might as well face it. He admitted his guilt, but I'm sure in his heart of hearts he wished he could have gotten into Canada, or somewhere where it wouldn't be him that was locked up. When I wrote to him, I did ask him, about why he did it, and he didn't know why. But he did feel that maybe he could do some good in prison. And as a well-educated man, he was trying to tutor some of the other prisoners after he reached a certain length of time. And that could have been nice, but he found that most of the guys who were in there with him had no interest in education. And he had to start at the very basics with them, maybe even reading, maybe even English wasn't a first language in some homes. He, had to start with people who weren't really educated, interested in education. They thought they had a career path, and that was, theft and robbery and things on the street. They had gangs that they were feeling were a part of they were in that family. They were not interested in the college boys' knowledge that much. So he had some frustration with that. One of his sisters became a lawyer, and I'm not sure what help he's getting to write a book himself, but I know he was interested in my letters to him to perhaps stimulate some thinking as he writes. I don't know if he's allowed to have my book, because it probably might look like he's glorified to him or to the inmates. It might not be something you'd put out in prison, but he's still somewhat mysterious in terms of how he'll survive this and how he'll end up, or what will end up. But I think he is in prison for the rest of his life. I looked at the life of Mr. Demers, and he had had a rough life too, but his life turned out entirely different. He was a much loved member of the community, respected, kind, had a wonderful wife, the same woman, for over 40 years when the crime was committed. She was on the scene. A neighbor brought her there while he was still alive. She was giving him first aid when he was taken away and never to come home. So the trauma is just so incredible what they went through. He had two boys, young men, quite young men now, adult, who wrote letters of affection for their father and what he had meant to them and how they were going to try and be like him. And those letters appear in the back of the book. He was a real loss. So he never knew his own father. His mother had several husbands or next of kin. He knew his grandparents. He had a sister that helped raise him. But here he is a little kid with a 12-year-old babysitter who didn't know much about right from wrong herself. And one day he fell at the beach when she was walking him, and the grandparents were at home. So she wanted to get the pebbles out of his knees because they were embedded, and she used steel wool. It's unbelievable. She remembers that she told me this herself. She said she didn't know it was wrong. She just knew she needed to get the pebbles out of his skin, and it worked. But then he had, big bloody knees for quite a while that needed medication. But he'd been through that. He also had colon problems, and he had spent really much of his life being sick off and on. In between doing pretty amazing things, he would then have these attacks. And with his wife's help and with the help of family members, he had just started to feel really healthy, though, for the first time in his life. And he made furniture by hand, beautiful pieces of furniture. He had some very high-end customers who always wanted him to do the work in their place. And then he disappeared because of this young man who just did a very foolish, crazy thing. I use crazy loosely, but.
So what did you learn about mental health as you're writing this book? What are some of the impressions that you've gotten?
Well, I guess the reason I was so drawn to the story was the mental health end, because I am a psychologist and I have practiced psychology many, many years. And I knew that he had to have illness to react the way he did, but I didn't know to what extent he would be able to block it and then continue with different things. What the problem is with so many bipolar people who have it in a serious way, as he, is that they don't like the medication. The medication, at least until recently, there may be a better one now, but at least until recently, the medication takes away your highs altogether, which is part of the problem, because you get too high and you get erratic and you don't know what you're doing. And a lot of people self-medicate with booze, and that brings them down a little, but that doesn't ever work out. You need to be on the meds. The other thing about the meds is that they cause weight gain. And for a young man who's an athlete, being overweight, and for most of us, nobody wants to be overweight. So they don't elect to stay on it because they don't have the highs and they don't have the slimness they like. And until there's an episode as horrible as this, they don't know, how badly they need it until it's too late. And now, of course, in an institution, he gets the medication, by order. He must take the meds. And that's why also it's important for him to stay inside where he can be medicated, and therefore quite a civil, intelligent, vital part of that community, even though he couldn't be trusted to do it on the outside, I wouldn't think. But Mr. Demers had been, the title of the book comes from the fact that he was used as a model for a statue that a friend of his who was a craftsman was doing for the state. And they were actually patriots, not Minutemen, but he looked like the Minuteman the way he was dressed for the for the statue, and it fit with the mood of the book to call him the Minuteman. But his, he was a symbol of I can't say the word, being very reputable, and people looked up to him, and he had, a sleek woodsman's physique, was always in the woods.
Now, this book, it touched a lot of people. It touched a lot of people from a lot of different areas, a lot of different parts of the country. Why do you think that is?
For me, the first dramatic thing that got me wasn't just that they lived in the next town a few minutes away, but that he had been so innocent. I mean, such a random thing. You're out in your barn working on your wood, making some furniture one morning, and this kid shows up and hacks you to death a few minutes later. The total, it's so bizarre. It's just so bizarre and so unexpected. You would think you couldn't be safer than staying home working in your barn, and yet this random act of mania took over, and you lose your life, and tragedy for your family.
So if somebody wants to pick up this book, where do we go to find it?
Amazon has First He Killed the Minuteman. Let me hold it up again. First He Killed the Minuteman. I can't get it straight. You've got it straight. And yes, it's under my name, Cynthia Herbert-Bruschi Adams. Cynthia Adams will get you there. But it is in Barnes & Noble. And if you're in Connecticut, it's in several other places, including the Hoot and Pourings and Passages. And in New Hampshire, it's in Gibson's bookstore in Concord. It's gotten around, but Amazon is quick.
So what's going on in your world, and how can we support you and your mission?
Well, half the proceeds of this book go to the widow of Mr. Demers and the mother of the murdered boy. And so, and the rest may help me to even come close to breaking even. I don't know yet, but it doesn't matter. Half the proceeds go to them. So buying the book, which is not expensive, will help those families. And then I'm going to continue writing other things, hopefully with messages in them, but this is important. And also recognizing mental illness, not ignoring it. If it's in your family, if you can get somebody to a meeting or to a doctor or do something for them that helps them to face reality and deal with what's the matter. And, the problem with some of the health professionals during COVID was they had pulled back, they were doing on-screen therapy, or they were saying, please come in. But he wasn't physically present where somebody could say, you've got to come with us. And not being able to grab him and put him in for help when he was in such bad shape was part of the problem, because he had been hallucinating about the evil people he'd read about. He had been writing on the walls of his apartment things about classic murderers from comic books and from Adam Lanza, the neighbor, and writing their names up about how the world had seen what happened when they snapped. Well, now the world would see what happened when he snapped. And all that's in the book, describing his decline and escalation to a murder.
So I love it. So guys, make sure you pick up the book. Make sure you support the mission. And I got to say, thank you for being one of my biggest supporters. I just want to say thank you so much. You're always there. You're always sharing. You're always commenting. So I just want to say thank you for being one of my biggest supporters.
Well, I like your mission. I like your mission and your honesty and how you reach out to people who haven't attained the insight you have, how you go for it.
Well, I appreciate you. And guys, make sure you pick up the book. And like the way I end every show, is every morning we wake up, we have a choice. you can be a victim or you can be a victor. And if you listen to this show every week, you're no longer a victim of your past. You're victors of your present and your future. Thank you guys for always showing up. You guys are winners. Like my t-shirt says, I win. And if you guys show up every week, you guys are winners also. Cynthia, I just want to say thank you for your friendship and thank you for all you do, especially for doing these things for these people that they need the help. And I want to say thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Have a great week and take care of yourself.
Okay, bye-bye.